Order. Seamus Logan to move the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move that this House has considered the use of food banks, and thank the Minister for attending today. And it's a great privilege to bring forward this debate on food banks under your chairpersonship, and I'm delighted to see such a good turnout this morning. Food banks and the alleviation of poverty in the UK is something that is very important personally to me, and something that I will strongly champion during my time in Parliament. Food banks in the UK are sadly an essential service for so many up and down the UK. It's sobering to remember this is the 21st century, and yet we seem to be labouring under Victorian values at times. 1 in 5 people using food banks are in employment. Anyone, for any reason, may find themselves needing the use of a food bank. Unemployment, a sudden reduction in benefits, or an unexpected bill, and household budgets are already stretched thin, are some of the reasons that some people need help from their local food bank. In my local constituency, I would like to pay tribute to the incredible work by Aberdeenshire North Food Bank and their incredible volunteers who operate in Peterhead and Fraserburgh every week. They're part of the Trussell Trust network of food banks. Aberdeenshire North Food Bank opened in 2013 and has distributed almost 10,000 parcels last year.
Will you give way on that?
I will, of course, yes.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and thank him for securing this really important debate. As he was mentioning, the Trussell Trust supports the largest network of food banks in the UK, and they distributed 61,000 food parcels in 2010-2011. But between April 2022 and 2023, the charity distributed close to 3 million food parcels, almost a 50% increase. I've got food banks in my area. Bridging the Gap are a food bank operating in Glastonbury and Street, and Melbourne Port Food Share projects supply sadly much needed food parcels to people in my constituency. But does the honourable member agree with me that the necessity of these groups is a sad indictment of the levels of poverty that many people are now facing, and that it's this government's responsibility to make sure its policies don't leave people hungry?
I thank the member for that point, and yes, I completely agree. I suspect you may have seen a copy of my speech beforehand. Anyway, the Aberdeenshire North Food Bank also operates on the Peterhead Community Market Garden in partnership with Stella's Voice, which is a community food growing space open for all to enjoy. It aims to provide healthy produce, build confidence and valuable training opportunities. It's incredible to see the grassroots enthusiasm for the project that I'm sure will go from strength to strength over the coming years. As many of my fellow colleagues will know, it is not just food that is provided at food banks, but also a powerful sense of community and much needed support. And I also want to pay tribute to other support services locally, notably the Food Larder in Fraserburgh, which is run under the auspices of the local community council. Poverty can be... I will give way, yes.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair. And congratulations on bringing forward this important debate. In Murray West Neil and Strathspey, we have food banks in every major town. We have Murray Food Plus operating, and we have Maidlick and Strathspey Food Hub. And over and above that, we've got community halls that are offering food hubs. We've got a clothing bank for school clothing. And they provide cross-referral to these other organisations. And there are many, many churches and other organisations, all of whom are providing a basic food service to literally thousands of people in a single constituency. And this is replicated throughout the UK. Does the honourable member agree that this is basically about choices? In Scotland, the Scottish Government has chosen to provide a child payment for every child. And that is a substantial amount of money every single week. But the choices that have been made here are to remove WFP from so many people.
Yes, thank you for that point, and I agree with the honourable member indeed. Poverty can be an incredibly isolating experience, with someone becoming more and more withdrawn as money weighs heavily on their mind all waking hours. Yes, I will.
I thank the honourable member for giving way and congratulate him on securing this very important and timely debate. And I'm sure the honourable member will agree with me that the recent damning data from the Social Metrics Foundation on poverty is both unacceptable and unjustifiable. We are the 6th richest economy in the world, but a quarter of the UK population are living in poverty. That's 16 million people. The statistics are alarming, but the quickest and the most easiest way of relieving these increasing, according to the End Child Poverty Coalition, is to remove the 2-child cap. So does he agree with me that the government needs to remove the cap sooner rather than later?
Yes, the honourable member makes a very powerful point, and I completely agree with her, as I will refer to that later on. As I say, poverty can be an incredibly isolating experience, people becoming more withdrawn as money weighs heavily on their mind. A quick chat with a volunteer can provide vital reassurance to those who need to use a food bank that they are not alone and support is out there. I'd like to share some brief testimony from those who have used the Aberdeenshire North Food Bank. Inverted commas, the volunteers were fantastic, offering a chat and a shoulder to cry on. I suffer from depression as well, and without the food bank, I don't think I would be here today. And that's from a former police officer who suffered delays to his employment support allowance and incurred significant costs associated with his transport. I'll make a wee bit of progress first. Thank you. Again, the people at the food bank were wonderful. They understood and saved us. A local single parent who was forced to reduce her working hours after her child fell ill. I'll give way now.
I'm extremely grateful. I represent Salisbury, where the Trussell Trust was founded, and I think he's making a very important point about the fact that many of the people who use food banks have many dimensions to their poverty, and it's important that we address that rather than believe that just by giving more food we will actually doing many of these people a true service in the long term. The APPG 10 years ago in this place looked at the deeper causes and looked at how we can build stronger foundations to stop people having to use food banks repeatedly. Would you agree that that's something we should be looking at now?
Seamus Logan.
Yes, I do agree. Thank you for that point, and the honourable member is obviously very well informed in these matters. The generosity and kindness of food bank volunteers can also not be understated. Something that I would impress on all listeners during this debate is that all of these services and support provided by food banks across the country are done out of the kindness of their hearts and at the sacrifice of their free time. Indeed, the hour-and-a-half debate here today seems like a very small tribute to their efforts by comparison. As demand surged for food poverty support during the COVID pandemic, volunteers across the country answered the call, and there was a massive increase in voluntary work and community spirit. Volunteers are not just a great credit to the local communities, but to the nation as a whole. I'm taken aback by the volume of local organisations that work with and support the Aberdeenshire North Food Bank. Local supermarkets, schools, businesses, medical practices, community groups such as my own local Rotary Club, coming together all year round to support those who need it. This is truly inspiring. I'd also like to pay tribute to the referral organisations across the constituency. They often take a proactive and caring approach when they think that someone may be struggling. While it is often a difficult conversation for both the referrer and the referee, it can lead to that invaluable support that provides families with much needed food and the support that they need. The scale of the operation involved with so many nationwide and local charities all working together to support the most vulnerable and provide nutritious food to families is simply incredible. It's a massive volunteering operation from start to finish. Deliveries from volunteer drivers that are received by volunteers at locations in community buildings, for example, who let out their premises to allow food banks to exist in a central location for the community, who then sort donations and distribute parcels. Fundraising is also an important part of food banks' operation and is year-long, with the funds going directly to maintaining the excellent service provided by the food bank. Indeed, with transport links where they are available in my local constituency, they're often long and costly, and it's heartening to know that home deliveries are also provided in some cases. Last week, the member for South Shields kindly sponsored an event involving representatives from Sustainable Food Places, a network that brings together food partnerships from across the UK that support healthy and sustainable food. In my constituency, Sustainable Food Places partners with Fair Food Aberdeenshire. The services provided by them are a great help to those in need in my constituency. They provide a food directory allowing members of the public to see organisations in their local area and across Aberdeenshire that provide help and support. This can be in the form of referrals, community larders, and sharing details of food outlets that offer reduced prices for children, allowing parents to get free food for their children when out and about. The transformative impact of support provided by these organisations across Scotland in particular cannot be understated. A recent survey of residents that utilise support from the Good Food Scotland network of larders in Glasgow found that 61% are eating more fresh fruit and vegetables, 64% are able to cook more balanced meals at home, 35% have less need for food banks, 63% describe higher levels of well-being. An average of £15 is being saved per visit on groceries. Colleagues, the timing of this debate, as the months get colder, perhaps even today is a good example, should be noted. Energy usage and associated costs will go up for families across the UK, and there will be many worrying at home and at work right now about how to heat their home, afford food, and give gifts to their friends and family this festive season. I will now turn to discuss food banks more generally in the UK and the measures that could be taken to reduce the need for them. Food banks have become a common feature across the UK, a stark symbol of the scale of food poverty across the country. The Trussell Trust, which operates the largest network of food banks in the UK, reported distributing 3.12 million emergency food parcels in 23-24. This represents a 94% increase from just 5 years prior. This should give us all pause for concern and spur us into action, actions which I will briefly describe shortly. However, it should be noted that the Trussell Trust, while being the largest food bank in the UK, does not encompass all food banks. Therefore, the figures of 3.12 million emergency food parcels being delivered is likely to be even higher when we factor in the work done by others. The escalating cost of living is a major driver in this worrying trend, with food prices experiencing a 19.1% surge in the year up to March 2023. This has undeniably fueled the crisis. When food poverty is described as household food insecurity, 22-23 figures show that the UK showed a startling 11% of its population in this category, over 7.2 million individuals. They grapple with food insecurity every day, a significant jump of 2.5 million from the previous year. Children bear a disproportionate burden, 17% experiencing food insecurity, highlighting the vulnerability of our little ones. Health issues, unemployment, cuts or delays to benefits, these are issues I've mentioned already. While intended as a temporary measure to provide emergency food aid, they are a stopgap measure rather than a long-term solution. And here is the crunch. We need measures to reduce or even eliminate the need for food banks in the UK. And here are the measures that I would describe, Chair. 1, an essentials guarantee, supported by the Trussell Trust and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. This would ensure that social security payments never fall below the amount needed to afford the essentials to live, including household bills, food and transportation. 2, a robust social safety net. This encompasses policy suggestions such as implementing a statutory living wage and dismantling austerity measures that have disproportionately impacted low-income households. Reforms to the benefits system, particularly addressing benefit delays, sanctions and the 5-week waiting period for universal credit payments. These are crucial elements. 3, the upcoming review into universal credit is a golden opportunity to realise important improvements that can be made, and I've mentioned them there. The UK Government needs to fully seize the opportunity to deliver on their manifesto commitment to abolish the need of people turning to emergency food to survive. 4, strengthening the nutritional safety net for children and young people. This includes proposals like automatic enrolment of eligible children for free school meals, as well as expanding eligibility criteria for this programme. Holiday programmes ensuring children's access to food during school breaks are also in need of support. Ensuring children get the healthy food they need, especially over holiday periods, is paramount. 5, empowering local communities. Another potential policy that could be explored is bolstering local safety nets through the development of expansion of dignified food aid models and the expansion of moving beyond the traditional charity model. These models include affordable food clubs, social supermarkets, and community kitchens, offering choice and fostering a sense of community. There are many policies that have been introduced by the Scottish Government, and they've gone a long way to reducing food poverty in Scotland. The Best Start Grant and Best Start Foods, the Scottish Child Payment, a game changer as described by charities, a child benefit, free school meals, free transport for under 22s, the school clothing grant, education maintenance allowance, child disability payment and adult disability payment. Indeed, even policies that do not directly provide financial support towards food provision can still indirectly reduce food poverty by giving households more breathing room and ability to dedicate more money to buying healthy food. In Scotland, we have the Scottish Welfare Fund. I believe there's a similar fund in England called the Household Support Fund. The problem with the latter is that it doesn't really have a strategic drive or intent. It's simply funds that are given to local councils and they're allowed to distribute as they wish. Central government strategy would be vital. A future policy currently being discussed in Scotland is a social tariff for the most vulnerable, such as those on low incomes, the elderly and the disabled. Reduced energy costs for the most vulnerable in society has the power to be transformative in terms of poverty and would avoid people choosing between heating and eating. In closing today, Chair, I would also like to pay tribute to the work done by the All-Party Parliamentary Group on food banks. I would encourage all members who are present in this debate, but not a member of the All-Party Group, to consider joining. I would like to thank all members present today in the Chamber for attending. I know that the continuing use of food banks is something that is deeply troubling for us all and creates huge concern across the UK and indeed in government. I look forward to hearing contributions from members and learning more about the incredible work done by food banks in their own constituencies. Finally, I would like to echo an expression used by a former party colleague, Richard Thompson, the member for Gordon, or the former member for Gordon in this place. He said, "It is often in the worst of circumstances that we find the best of ourselves." Thank you.
Honourable and right honourable members will concede that quite a number of people want to speak. I don't really want to put a formal time limit on, so I'll do an informal 1.5 and see how the first two go, and then take it from there, because I do want all members to come in. So the question is that this House has considered the use of food banks. Gregory Campbell.
Madam Chair, this is a very important debate, and I acknowledge the efforts made by the honourable member, and the attendance is testimony to the importance of the debate. I just wonder if the government have taken account of some of the concerns, the extrapolation of continuing poverty, even with the increase in terms of benefits that have gone on in the past few years. It appears that, as the honourable member has alluded to, there has been a massive increase in poverty, particularly amongst those families where children, and we see children being affected not just in the fact that there is insufficient food for them to eat, but where they are getting food, they are getting unhealthy foods to eat, and we have seen childhood obesity levels increasing as a result of that. So there is a series of factors that have to be addressed in terms of this problem. The one issue that I would want to draw attention to, Madam Chair, is the work of faith-based groups. That none of them are acting out of any selfish interest. They are simply putting the gospel message into practice, where they are trying to reach communities that otherwise would not be reached. And I think we should all give them their support, commend them, as we do other groups, but we look to the government to try and cut through, to try and ensure that the dependency and the need for people to access food banks is lessened. I very much hope but doubt that we will get to the point where there is no need whatsoever of any food banks, but we need to minimise the dependency and the need in communities for food banks. Thank you.
To correct what I said, it's 2.5, and then we'll reduce to 2. But I'm hoping to take the Lib Dem spokesperson at 10:28. Baggy Shankar.
It's a pleasure to contribute under your chairship today, Mrs Vaz, and I congratulate the honourable member for bringing this really important debate. As a few members have already highlighted, and as I continually hear on the doorsteps, enduring surgeries in my Derby South constituency, the use of food banks, unfortunately, is on the rise. The rise is a damning indictment of political choices that have failed to protect the most vulnerable in our communities. We've already heard the Trussell Trust has estimated in 23-24 3.12 million people in the UK used a food bank. This is compared to just under 26,000 in 2008-2009. Food bank teams make an extraordinary contribution to address the nation's food insecurity crisis, and Derby is no exception to that. Volunteers and charities like the Food for Thought, Derby Alliance, just to name one, work tirelessly to support those in need in partnership with Community Action Derby and other organisations. In total, there's about 14 food or meal-based charities that are working in and around Derby, providing personalised support. And last year they gave over 20,000 food parcels to families across Derby. However, there's only so much work these amazing organisations can do. Poverty and food insecurity are deeply intertwined, with clear links to austerity measures. Changes to the welfare system, delays and reductions introduced by the Tory-led austerity era marked the beginning of a dramatic rise in food bank reliance. This isn't just my view, it's grounded in evidence. A systematic review by researchers at Imperial College, London and the University of Liverpool directly ties austerity policies to the insecurity of food and the rise in food banks. So, what can be done? The scale of the problem is immense, but the Labour government is already taking meaningful steps towards addressing this. Children should not bear the brunt of a failed system that means they go to school hungry, and that's why I'm proud to support the government's commitment to investing over £30 million in the rollout of free breakfast clubs next year, and I think that will make a considerable difference to the lives and the opportunities for these young children. But more can always be done, and I welcome this government's approach to making sure that we have a level playing field and make or take down, should I say, barriers to opportunity and support young families.
Jim Shannon.
I commend the Honourable Member for Aberdeenshire North and Morris East for leading the day's debate, and by doing so giving us all an opportunity to approach this debate. As we look towards Christmas, it's a time of a year where we think of those who are struggling and in need of support. And I have no hesitation saying year after year our food banks are clearly the pillars for those in the local community. So it's really good to be here to discuss that. I will not be able to continue without putting on record my sincere thanks to each volunteer who goes above and beyond to support people across the United Kingdom who are struggling. I have a fantastic relationship with the local food banks in my constituency of Strangford. It was the first Trussell Trust food bank ever to come to Northern Ireland, came to Newton Ours, my constituency, and they've built up a marvellous relationship with all the local churches. My honourable friend Priest from Derry referred to it. What it did, it brought all the churches together on an ecumenical, on the best ecumenical way of doing things, of course, and they ensured that they then fed into that there and give their volunteers, and they've helped so many people. Tomorrow, the food banks, the Trussell Trust will be here in the square, in Parliament Square. There's another thing happening today which would have clashed with their one, so they've put theirs on for tomorrow. So if you're free tomorrow between 9:30 and 12, the Trussell Trust members will be in Parliament Square. In my constituency of Strangford, 3,064 emergency food parcels provided from April 23 to March 24, 57% increase. 1,284 emergencies, a 52% increase, and 79% of the UK public agreed that poverty in the UK is a massive problem, and believe that was a response of the government to change this. And we do look to the Minister, we do look to government to bring about those changes, whether or not you're in government or not in government. It's really important that we do that. One quick thing, Madam Chair, in relation to the food banks, it brings together the best in people. And I see the food banks and those who participate and contribute and help along the way as that as well. Food inflation has risen by some 19% in April 23, 10% for much part of this year. 200,000 people face hunger and hardship in Northern Ireland, 130,000 working age adults, 12,000 pensioners, 62,000 children. That gives an idea of what the food banks do and how they reach out. In Northern Ireland, 25% of families with part-time work face hunger and hardship, and 39% of people with families across the UK universal credit face hunger and hardship. The figure of 12,000 pensioners facing hunger and hardship, I can imagine, can only increase this year. There are pensioners out there who depend on this payment and winter fuel payment to keep them warm through the winter, and all we can do now is hope that they are not faced with any decision between heating their homes and putting food on the table. Last point, Madam Chair. Social security changes can pose at the bedrock for supporting those in need of the most, including supporting those in the breadline with essentials. So I hope that our government and our Minister will do what they can to ensure that families don't struggle. I look to the Minister and ask how the Honourable Lady will consider meeting with representatives from Northern Ireland to get the full scale of the issue and to see what more we can do to support those on the brink of poverty. If the Honourable Lady is free tomorrow, I'll see her at 9:30 in the square.
Thank you, Mrs Vaz. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I congratulate the honourable member for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East for securing this important debate. Now, most people will assume that Cheltenham, the town I represent, is a well-heeled sort of place. The impression of many is of grand Regency terraces, beautiful architecture and the prosperity that comes with excellent schools and a thriving cybersecurity sector. But that is not the whole story, I regret to tell honourable members. Large sections of our population struggle. We have swathes of Cheltenham living in poverty, providing demand for 6 food banks. I'm told that around 550 households at the moment access a food bank or food pantry every week in Cheltenham. That's thousands of people. In 2023-24, 1,068 households accessed a food bank or food pantry for the first time ever. During that year, more than 8,000 people were at one point or another in receipt of a food parcel. This is in Cheltenham, a prosperous town. In the current financial year, the local council has allocated £45,240 to support these food banks. These are supported by other charitable donations made by generous Cheltenham people. When I visited the food pantries and spoken with staff and customers, the picture is of people who simply want to get on in life. None of them want to be at food banks, but circumstances, nearly always beyond their control, have led them to that point. They are united in wanting nothing more than fairness, and there are some very practical steps that could be taken to achieve that fairness. Firstly, lifting the 2-child benefit cap would remove hundreds of thousands of children from poverty at a single stroke. If that was done alongside the expansion of free school meals for all children in poverty, then the impact could be extremely powerful. We need reform of universal credit too. All of these would see fewer children turning up at school hungry. They would see fewer children getting home from school hungry. They would see fewer families desperately trying to make ends meet by using food banks, and fewer pensioners forced to do the same. This is all very achievable. All we need to do is work within the systems that already exist and show the kindness and compassion that lies within all of us. And on the subject of kindness and compassion, I will finish by paying tribute to those brilliant local people in Cheltenham working at the local facilities that include help for people who can't pay their bills. They are too many to name, but I will mention 2. Faith Rook-Matthews in Springbank and Alison Hudson at the Cornerstone Centre. We thank them and their colleagues for all they do. Thank you.
Williams.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairperson, Ms Vaz, and I congratulate the honourable member for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East for securing this important debate. Food bank use is on the rise across my constituency of Stoke-on-Trent North and Kidsgrove. Local food banks and food pantries like the Kidsgrove Rotary Food Hub, the Hub Foundation, the Community Grocery in Burslem, the Stoke-on-Trent and Newcastle Underline Food Banks, and those offered by so many faith groups and community groups collectively work incredibly hard, but all have seen a significant increase in demand. Now, I warmly welcome this government's commitment to lifting families out of poverty. The rollout of breakfast clubs in our primary schools will help our youngest to have the best start in life. And I was pleased to see in the budget the increase in the national living wage, putting an extra £1,400 into the pockets of thousands of residents across my constituency. However, I worry about the immediate problem of sustainability of our services due to the very high levels of demand. Indeed, a recent review into food poverty by scrutiny members at Stoke-on-Trent City Council found that demand for emergency parcels for food in Stoke-on-Trent is nearly 5 times, that's 5 times higher than typical levels seen across England. The Stoke-on-Trent Food Bank alone last year supported nearly 20,000 residents. In winding up, can I ask the Minister to meet with me and my honourable friends for Stoke-on-Trent South, Stoke-on-Trent Central and Newcastle-under-Lyme to discuss the increasing demand for supporting food locally. We're on the front line in terms of the cost of living crisis. And whilst this Labour government is starting to make life better for people, I want the Minister to understand the real difficulties that the constituents face across my constituency of Stoke-on-Trent North and Kidsgrove. Ms Vaz, this debate is not only about food, it's about decency, it's about respect, and it's about the kind of country that we want to live in. I'm determined to do all I can as a Member of Parliament for Stoke-on-Trent North and Kidsgrove to make life better for the residents of my area. Thank you.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Honourable Member for Aberdeenshire and North Bay for his passionate and articulate contribution. In Salford, we've got some amazing and dedicated people running food banks and networks, but they shouldn't need to exist. Charities and good people should not have to step in to provide the most fundamental human need in this, one of the richest economies in the world. And we know the cause of this crisis. 14 years of austerity-driven spending cuts, labour market casualisations and welfare reform hammering the poorest and most vulnerable. And today there are literally millions of children across our country who are quite literally going to bed hungry. Now, previous Chancellor Gordon Brown, who championed the eradication of child poverty, understood the policy-driven agenda of the previous government. He said, since 2010, you've had the two-child rule, you've had the benefit cap, you've had the housing benefit limit imposed, you've had this series of deductions which have become very widespread so that half of the people receiving benefits were having deductions. So at every point, plus the freezing of benefits, including child benefit, you've got people being made worse off. During his time in government, ending child poverty was a key mission. He believed that it was possible in his lifetime, and frankly, it still is. Now, I welcome the Minister's hard work on this issue, and I know she agrees wholeheartedly. So the Government's Child Poverty Task Force is, of course, welcome. So too is the strengthening of workplace and trade union rights. But these initiatives will take time. And there are immediate actions that charities are strongly encouraging the Government to take. And that includes ending the two-child limit. It includes developing a long-term scheme and funding settlement for local crisis support after the current household support fund ends. It includes implementing an essentials guarantee that would introduce a protected minimum floor in universal credit to ensure families facing hardship do not go without essentials like food and fuel. And it includes extending free school meals to all primary school children and set out plans to address holiday hunger after the latest holiday activities and food programme funding ends. Ultimately, we need to recognise that regular daily access to affordable, safe and nutritious food should neither be a charitable act nor a luxury, but a basic right. Thank you, Mrs Vaz.
Christine Sullivan.
Thank you, Mrs Vaz, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today, and also thank the honourable member for bringing forward this critical debate. I don't doubt that everyone in this room agrees that it is scandalous that people are forced to go to food banks to ensure that they don't go hungry. And 2 decades ago, it was almost unthinkable that we'd see such soaring levels of food insecurity and food poverty in our communities. But as we've just heard, 14 years of austerity and economic chaos have pushed more people into hardship. And in my constituency of Bathgate and Linlithgow, we've seen a 77% increase in the reliance of food banks over the past 5 years. And that means that stomachs rumble through school lessons. We have increased vulnerability to illness and fatigue, coupled with the inescapable stress about where the next meal is coming from. And my thanks to West Lothian Food Bank, Falkirk Food Bank and the West Lothian Food Network for the sterling work that they do in providing support with empathy and compassion to those in need. But eliminating the need for food banks is more than just charity or words. It is about choices, decisions and actions, having the political will to tackle the drivers of inequality. And this Labour government, as we know, has already got to work with wage rises to ensure the cost of living is incorporated into those in the lowest pay. And starting next year with free breakfast clubs in England and Wales, and I hope that the First Minister will keep to that commitment in Scotland so that children are ready to learn free from the pangs of hunger. It's a good start, but more has to be done, and the Scottish Government has a key role to play. It has received £41 million as a result of the Labour Government's additional funding to the Household Support Fund, and as yet that has not been allocated to support those households most in need. Demand for Scottish Welfare Fund has soared in recent years without any uplift to meet the increased need. And free school meals to P6s and P7s have been kicked into the long grass again. That would have enabled parents to have more money in their pockets. There's much more that has to be done, but I have to be clear, all governments must work together and strive for a society so that people can live with dignity and free from the scourge of hunger that should have no place in our society today.
Thank you, Ms Vaz. I'd like to congratulate the Right Honourable Member for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East for securing this important debate. The work that food banks do is invaluable. And in my own constituency of Brecon, Radnor and Cwmtawi, I'd like to personally thank all of the volunteers, the dedicated volunteers, who run them for the tremendous work they do across our communities. There's Pantry Food Bank in Pontardawe. There's one in Brecon, Knighton and Prestine, Llandrindod Wells, Rheada, Ystrygynlais, Ystalyfera and Gwancai Gyrwyn, all of which provide vital support to people in our communities, helping those in need. And that need is growing across Wales. Food bank parcel distribution increased by 77% since 2018. An estimated 6% of households in Wales accessed food aid last year, and 1 in 4 households in Wales is either eating smaller meals or skipping meals altogether. In Wales, child poverty rates are significantly worse than elsewhere in the United Kingdom. In my own region, a staggering 1/3 of children in Neathport Talbot Council and 20% in Powys live in absolute poverty. And these high child poverty rates have remained stubbornly high across Wales, not moving barely at all since the early 2000s. And this can only represent a failure of policy and political will across successive governments on both sides of the M4. Volunteers at food banks often say that although the work they do is valuable, they shouldn't need to exist at all. They exist due to our state's failure to address poverty within our communities and to adequately support those who are struggling to make ends meet. Tackling food poverty requires a cross-sector approach. The rising costs of energy and housing are pushing more and more people into poverty. The cost of energy itself makes producing food in this country even more expensive. In Wales, we urgently need to see more investment and well-paying jobs brought back into deprived areas. Former mining communities, such as those in the south of my constituency, are still waiting for their new industries to arrive. The new government cannot afford to continue to make the mistakes of the past. We cannot end up in a situation where the same number or more children are relying on food banks in 10 years' time as they do today. And we will continue to hold this government, as well as those in the devolved parliaments, to account to ensure that this isn't the case.
I'm going to have to reduce it to time limit to 2 minutes. Graham Downey.
That's pressure, Ms Chair. Thank you very much, Ms Vaz, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and can I congratulate the honourable member on securing the debate today. I do believe that every member of this place wants to reduce the number of people relying on food banks and to tackle poverty effectively. I am surprised the honourable member did choose in his speech to reference so many policies which are devolved, something he made clear during his point of order yesterday in the Chamber that he does not believe belong in this place. Chair, I do want to start by thanking the 200 volunteers who operate the Dunfermline Food Bank in my constituency, with 1 site in Dunfermline itself and 4 satellite sites around the area. They are led by the fantastic Sandra, whom I was delighted to meet over the summer. I spoke to Sandra again this week and asked her for an update. Within the Dunfermline area, Sandra said that in the year from April 23 to March 24, the Dunfermline Food Bank fed just under 9,000 people. Approximately one-third of them were children. This government has already delivered a genuine living wage in Scotland, meaning a pay rise for more than 200,000 of the lowest paid Scots. £3.4 billion of extra funding for Scotland, and the question now for the SNP is how will they spend that? There are no hiding places. Will they carry on as they have to date, scrapping the Fuel and Security Fund from £30 million to zero, cutting and scrapping the Parental Transition Fund and driving more people towards food banks? Chair, I genuinely hope the SNP take action in their budget in December to tackle poverty, and I truly hope they are successful. But the warning signs are not positives, with groups such as the Poverty and Inequality Commission and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation saying we are running out of ways to stress the need for rapid action from the Scottish Government. Food banks and the Trussell Trust have told us that the cap on universal credit deductions are one of the main things pushing people towards food bank use. And that is why I am delighted the budget last month reduced the cap from 25% to 15%. Is this the limit of what this government wants to do and what I want to achieve? Absolutely not. However, this last budget did set a clear direction and it shows the priorities of the Labour government. And to return to Sandra, just to close, Madam Chair, she said to me, I'm the only person who wants my job eliminated. I want to be out of a job because it would mean we have successfully ended the need for food banks in this country.
Good, Adam.
Thank you very much. And I say what an honour it is to speak in your stewardship, and I'd like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East for this very vital debate. Echoing my fellow members' sentiments, the fact that our food banks are here is unacceptable, but those that donate to it, those that run it, are a testimony to our country's unity, compassion and kindness. And in that, I'd like to quickly mention a few in my constituency, which is the Gold Hill Adventure Park, Wesley Hall Pantry, which is unfortunately very close to the house that I grew up in, and the queue goes past my house now, unfortunately. The Erzmonsel Club for young people, and one in particular, which was also mentioned by a member of mine, regarding faith, which is a Sikh community charity called Midlands Langar Seva Society, which does its work in a church serving all the community regardless of faith and no faith. They do an absolutely incredible work. But this shouldn't be the case. We are the 6th richest nation in the world, and we have millions using our food banks. And the situation is only going to get worse, as according to the Trussell Foundation, the Trussell Trust, with a record 9.3 million people, including 1 in 5 children, are going to be facing hunger and hardship. This is 4 million more than 5 years ago. I would like to touch upon briefly a few points that I think we need to address. One was mentioned by my honourable member from Cheltenham, and that is this, that we have to remove the myth that those that use food banks are somehow deserving of it. Having employment is not a reliable route out of hardship, with the conclusion that 58% of people facing hunger and hardship live in families where at least one member is working. Secondly, how disproportionately it's affecting people with disabilities that use food banks. 26% of the UK population suffer from some form of disability, whether it's mental health or physical disability, but 69% of people are referred to the Trussell Trust's food banks. And amongst the main reasons cited is lack of information about entitlements, difficulties in claiming and sustaining benefits, especially PIP, insufficient income from the benefits once they receive them, and further reductions due to income from sanctions, cap and debt deductions. Thirdly, I'd like to mention children. It's already been mentioned before. One of the quickest ways we can bring children out of this poverty is to scrap the 2-child benefit cap instantly. And finally, I would just like to quickly touch upon some anecdotal evidence of the increased use of food banks in the ones that I have volunteered at, and that is individuals that are coming from abroad, from agencies and students, and we really need to address rogue people who are bringing people in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vance, and thanks to the Honourable Member for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East for securing this vital debate. Austerity is, of course, ideologically driven, and it was in the first instance an assault on the most vulnerable and the poorest in society. And so, as poverty grew, we also saw a decade where the wealthiest in society accelerated away from everyone else as they enjoyed tax cuts. And obviously, gross inequality followed. Areas such as in my constituency have seen industry leave and low-wage, insecure employment become the norm, with rising poverty and suicide rates and decreasing life expectancy. Austerity has ripped the soul out of Britain, and naturally austerity has increased food bank usage. And after this ideological assault on the poorest and most vulnerable, a new target was needed. This was neatly labelled as the cost of living crisis, but what it really was, it was a continuation of the degradation of working class people. And to show how things have changed, I'm 42, and when I was at school, if there was a classmate that was poor, it was probably because mum and dad didn't work. Nowadays, we have the creation of a new strata of society, that of the in-work poor, a situation where mum and dad both work full-time jobs and still don't have enough to put food on the table. And the scale of the cost of living crisis, it really cannot be denied. Rocketing energy bills, increased food costs, wage suppression and stagnation, out-of-control inflation. And austerity and the cost of living crisis have been crises for the poorest, most vulnerable, most disadvantaged, and for the working class. So it is little wonder that food bank usage is what it is. The government cannot afford to tinker around the edges of what we do. We must transform society. The welfare system, as mentioned already, it needs changed. Universal credit is just too low. People cannot afford the basic essentials that are needed to merely get by, to meet their basic needs for food, heating, toiletry and accommodation costs. And the decline of local councils is also well documented. It's local councils that provide vital public services. England has seen local councils declare bankruptcy, and that is a realistic possibility for Scottish local authorities. Bankruptcy is the result of councils eventually buckling under the strain of rising costs and funding cuts. Now is not the time for the government to have limited ambition.
Chairmanship, and I congratulate the honourable gentleman member for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East for securing this crucial debate. The alarming fact is that after 14 years of Tory government, food bank use is a significant problem in every constituency in every corner of the country, and we've heard that today. We're lucky in Winsford, Northwich and Middlewich to have some truly dedicated volunteers keeping our food banks going, as well as charities like Changing Lives Together running no food waste projects that, in addition to reducing the amount of perfectly good food being disposed of, offer people the dignity of choice whilst paying a small contribution towards their food. At Mid-Cheshire Food Bank, nearly 6,600 parcels of food were distributed in the last 12 months, with 38% of those having gone to children. These are not just troubling statistics, they reflect the struggles faced by countless individuals and families within the communities that I represent. They may be struggling to cope with debts, changes in their benefits entitlement, ill health, domestic violence or family breakdown. We know that over recent years, the previous Tory government's cost of living crisis left more and more people grappling with soaring prices of essential goods. Skyrocketing energy bills have strained tight budgets. Rising housing costs burdened those who were already stretched thin, making it increasingly difficult to find safe and decent and affordable accommodation. And stagnating wages and the prevalence of insecure work only compound these challenges, leaving people in a perpetual state of uncertainty. This has got to change. We now have a government in place that I believe will prioritise the well-being of individuals, families and entire communities. A government that will address the root causes of poverty and food insecurity, and a government that will ensure that everybody has access to fair wages, affordable housing and secure employment opportunities, thereby raising living standards and lifting people out of poverty. We must continue to strive to create a society where every individual has access to the basic necessities they need and where no one is forced to rely on a food bank to survive.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate my honourable friend for bringing this important debate. Food poverty, or poverty in general, is a growing crisis in the UK that demands urgent action. The increasing reliance on food banks is not only a humanitarian concern, but a reflection of deeper systemic challenges that we as a society must address. We have heard the statistics across this chamber, and they are sobering. The Trussell Trust had 1,699 food banks in 2023-24, which have only increased, and there are nearly 1,200 independent food banks across the country. So I estimate there are over 3,000 food banks today which distribute 4 to 5 million parcels every year. The root causes have been identified, and I won't take time to repeat, but these include wages not keeping pace with the rising cost of living, inflation, many workers being trapped in low-paying, insecure jobs, benefits cuts, delays to universal credit payments, the two-child benefit cap, and now compounded by the withdrawal of the winter fuel allowance. There are 4 out of 10 children in my constituency who live in poverty. The reliance on food banks is a symptom of deeper issues. It is not just about food insecurity, but about income security. The government must act decisively to address these root causes. I welcome the raising of the minimum wage, but it must reflect the actual cost of living. Benefits must also reflect the cost of living. A single person allowance of £85 is £25 less than the cost of basic essentials for a person, according to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. I will conclude, Madam Chairman, to say the increasing use of food banks is not inevitable. It is a consequence of policy choices. The UK is the 6th wealthiest nation in the world, and no one should go hungry in one of the world's largest economies. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under you today. And I'd like to thank the Honourable Member and congratulate him for securing time for this debate today. I think it's been quite interesting so far. So I do welcome this debate, and I make my comments within the context of my register of interests. Food poverty is a massive issue in the UK generally and in Scotland specifically. And like others, I want to start by thanking everyone in my constituency who are working to address food poverty. In the past few weeks, I've met people from Oxgang's Neighbourhood Centre, Community for Food, Soul Food Oxgangs, Space at Broomhouse Hub and the Open Heavens Edinburgh Church in Wester Hales. All are doing great work filling empty stomachs. So far, people have spoken at length about the need to reform the welfare system, and I think we're in broad agreement about that. And we've also spoke about how groups in our communities have rallied to this cause, particularly faith groups. And I think that's a key conclusion so far. But I think we also have to think about the long-term causes which are underlying poverty, and key to them is education. Because if we want to break the cycle of poverty that people inherit from their parents, we have to invest in education. And for too many children, particularly in Scotland, they're in an intractable situation. Education is key to improving their life chances, but poor nutrition means it's a barrier to them making the most of it. On top of that, the education system in Scotland is holding people back because it's just not a priority for the Scottish Government. This is shameful, as we know education is key to ending that cycle of poverty. And it's not just in schools. Our universities are underfunded as well. Places are capped. Fee levels in Scotland are students don't pay fees, but the fees the universities do get are £2,000 below what they get in England. And we know how stressed the situation is in England. So yes, food bank use is shameful, but we have to be honest about the underlying causes of poverty. We have to accept that neither the UK nor the Scottish Government can be proud of its record over the last 10 or 15 years. I'm disappointed there's not more Conservative colleagues here today to talk about that record. And we have to be honest about the factors underpinning poverty. We will only succeed in creating a prosperous nation without poverty if we create the conditions for good jobs, genuine affordable housing, income security and meaningful opportunities that drive justice and give people hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Baz. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today. And I'd also like to extend my congratulations to the member opposite for securing this important debate. Food banks have undoubtedly become a lifeline for countless families and children across the UK, including in my own constituency of Gloucester. And I'm deeply grateful for the vital work that organisations like Gloucester Food Bank do in providing immediate support to those in crisis. And I also wish to highlight the work of all other charities and organisations tackling food poverty in Gloucester, including Gloucester Feed the Hungry, the Redwell Centre, Barney's Pantry, the Community Kitchen, the Welcome Table and Quedgley Community Pantry, to name just a few. Until 2010, food banks were something rare, something that only a few families ever had to rely on, perhaps in times of extreme need or emergency. But today, that is no longer the case, and last year alone, more than 3.1 million emergency food parcels were handed out. That is a disgrace. It's a disgrace that in a nation as wealthy as the UK, with the 6th largest economy, that food poverty is no longer an isolated issue. It is a growing crisis and one that worsens each year. In 2023, 7.2 million people, including 17% of children, were living in food-insecure households. It's a tragedy, and it is a failure of our social and our economic system. Now, there are plenty of examples of failure under the last Conservative government, but the rise in the use of food banks stands out as perhaps one of the most alarming. Austerity, benefit sanctions, the botched rollout of universal credit, underpaid, insecure employment, and NHS left to fail, these policies have contributed to an epidemic of food poverty, and as always, it falls to a Labour government to fix the mess that they left behind. Food banks in Gloucester provide invaluable support, offering a lifeline in times of crisis. However, the work comes at a heavy cost. Volunteers and organisers are under immense pressure, and many reaching the point of exhaustion to meet the growing demand. And I'm pleased that this government has started to take the action necessary to make work pay, improve workers' rights, improve renters' rights, build more social housing and to tackle child poverty head-on. Thank you.
Sam Carling.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bath, for being the Chair today. Food bank use massively increased under the last government, and it has nearly doubled since 2018-19. Of the 3.12 million emergency food parcels distributed by the Trussell Trust network in 2023-24, over 1.14 million of these were for children. In June and July of this year, 13.6% of households reported being food insecure, meaning they ate less or went a day without eating because they couldn't access or afford food. I want to highlight the Peterborough Food Partnership that helps many of my constituents in North West Cambridgeshire. In October, they received the Sustainable Places Bronze Award in recognition of their work towards increasing access to healthy food, tackling diet-related ill health and creating a vibrant and diverse sustainable food economy. The partnership contains over 100 organisations across the area, including the local farming community, the public sector, Peterborough City Council, local food businesses and, of course, Peterborough Food Bank. Peterborough Food Bank served nearly 3,000 households in 2023 and saw a huge 34% increase in parcels in 2023-24 compared to the previous financial year. They partner with Citizens Advice Peterborough, who have experienced an exponential increase in people trying to access their services for income maximisation and debt advice, with up to 1,800 unique calls per month, but they're only able to answer sort of up to 15 to 20% of these, so there's a real issue there. But through this partnership working, people who attend food banks in Peterborough, including CSK, my constituency, are able to receive wraparound support from Citizens Advice and other organisations to start to tackle the root causes of their issues. Often it's debt, that in turn caused by general poverty. I'm so grateful for the work that Peterborough Food Bank do alongside all the other organisations within the Sustainable Food Partnership, and I hope that's an approach we can start to replicate elsewhere. Thank you.
Sorry, there's only 10 seconds. If you, Douglas McAllister, if you can do it in 30 seconds, and then I'll take the wind-ups.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulate the Honourable Member for securing the debate. In my constituency of Western Bartonshire, I have witnessed at first hand the devastating consequences of 14 years of Tory austerity and more than 17 years now of SNP government failure. Prior to both taking office, we didn't have any food banks, food trusts or food pantries in Western Bartonshire, and it's heartbreaking that so many families in Western Bartonshire are now struggling to put food on the table. Madam Chair, at Western Bartonshire, we have had to step up because the SNP Scottish Government abandoned their commitment to address holiday hunger and removed the funding completely from the Summer Shine programme. It's not inevitable that food banks across our country are to be a permanent and lasting feature within communities. Under Labour, tackling child poverty, tackling food poverty is back where it belongs, at the heart of government, and by 2026 it will be at the heart of both governments.
Thank you very much. Lib Dem spokesperson Sarah Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'd like to thank the member for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East for securing this incredibly important debate, as can be seen by the number of people who have spoken and those who have not been able to. And I agree with members who've spoken so eloquently that today that the guiding principle of the UK welfare system must be to ensure that no one is unable to meet their children's basic needs for survival and participation in society. But our social security system in this country is not working as it should and is driving people further into poverty and making families rely on these food banks. As the Right Honourable Member for Glastonbury mentioned earlier, the Trussell Trust alone delivered 3 million food parcels this year. And speaking to food bank organisers across my own constituency, it's clear that donations are down, but demand is up. And as the Right Honourable Member for Stoke-Trent North and Kidsgrove mentioned, this is a failing in our country. One of the major problems that's driving reliance on food banks is this increasing cost of living, which, as we know, has not been helped by rising costs of energy. Corsham Churches Together, in my constituency, organises a food bank. In their own words, they say, there's no point having food if you don't have the energy to cook it. Which is why this particular food bank is now also offering fuel vouchers up to £40 a month right through to winter for those on pay-as-you-go meters. And the energy costs is stretching this need continuously. And as my right honourable friend for Brecon, Ragnar and Cwm Tawe mentioned, this is leading to child poverty. There's additional pressure on food banks during school holidays, because whilst children are at school during the week, they're able to access free school meals on the whole. Whereas come school holidays, food banks are finding themselves inundated with young families. On that basis, my Liberal Democrat colleagues and I find it astonishing that this government refuses to lift the two-child cap, which would move thousands or millions of children out of poverty, as has been mentioned by colleagues across this room. By removing that limit, we would transform the lives of straggling families and help to reduce dependency on these food banks. As colleagues have pointed out, how we treat our most vulnerable in society tells you a lot about the values which we bring. And I think that one part that has not been mentioned is that of asylum seekers. As a Liberal Democrat councillor and food bank volunteer in Corsham, in my constituency, mentioned to me this weekend, the Home Office is only giving asylum seekers £35 a week to cover food, toiletries and clothing, and many of them are also relying on food banks to survive. I would be grateful if the Minister could outline what actions are being taken to support the most vulnerable, such as asylum seekers and children, and to alleviate their reliance on food banks.
Opposition spokesperson, Shadow Minister Danny Kruger.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs Vaz, and my congratulations and thanks to the Honourable Member for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East for bringing the debate, and I'm grateful to everyone's contributions. It's been a very, very helpful debate. Happy to take interventions from Honourable Members who weren't able to get in if there's time. So let me acknowledge first that I recognise and agree with Honourable Members who have pointed out the existence and the extent of poverty in our country is shameful. It's a source of deep shame to our country that we have so many people reliant on the charity of others for essentials. And I want to quickly pay tribute to the food banks in my constituency and in my former constituency of Devizes, who do such good work with food banks there, and also in previous work that I've done with the Hammersmith and Fulham food banks. So I echo the points made by honourable members about the great work and the valuable work that these organisations do. Happy to give way.
Thank you very much for giving way. The work I've seen at the DN7 Food Bank and the Isle of Axholme Food Share project is extraordinary. The volunteers are inspiring. The same can be said of Hatfield's Pre-Loved Uniform Bank and also of the Hygiene Bank in Doncaster. Would the honourable member agree with me, though, that whilst their work is amazing, that these type of banks are not the kind of banks that we want to see grow on our high streets or even exist in the first place?
Danny Kruger.
I'm grateful, and I recognise those points, and I pay tribute to his local food banks as well. So let's just look at what has been happening, and honourable members have cited some of these facts. The fact is that the Trussell Trust, particularly, the number of parcels handed out by that organisation doubled over the course of the last Parliament in light of the COVID crisis and then the cost of living crisis. And while we should not, and I do emphasise this, I don't think we should take food bank use as a perfect proxy for poverty. The fact is data is patchy and it is affected by the supply of food banks. There is also an important displacement effect. It's not necessarily the case that all the need that is identified by food banks is new need. It might formerly have been met by other sources, by family, friends and other community organisations. Nevertheless, I think the profile of food bank use does track the economy and the state of poverty in our country. We saw it spike during the lockdowns, it then declined and then spiked again with the cost of living crisis. And I'm afraid to say it hasn't really declined since. And we now see that 1.4% of households have used a food bank in the last month and 3% in the last year. These are very significant numbers. So what is going on? Echo the point made by my honourable friend earlier from Salisbury about the complexity of the causes for food bank use. But the fact is, we recognise the obvious point that it is ultimately down to household income. And I want to cite the work of Hunger in the UK, who have pointed out that the main reasons for problems in people's household income are to do with difficulties with benefits, mentioned by many honourable members, the existence of in-work poverty, and the difficulty in gaining well-paid work, particularly among disabled people and carers. Happy to give way.
Can I thank the right honourable member for giving way? A number of constituents have written to me expressing their struggle to afford food despite being in work. It's not an isolated issue. In mid-2022, almost 90% of those referred to food banks in Wales were in work and had such low incomes that they were living in destitution. Would the honourable member agree with me that the working poor created by the last government is disgracefully reminiscent of Victorian times?
Shadow Minister Danny Kruger.
Well, I do recognise the extent of the problem of in-work poverty and of people reliant on both on benefits to sustain their incomes and on additional support from the outside. I don't accept that this is a new phenomenon. And in fact, I'll come to the last government's record in a moment, but I know that the Honourable Lady would like to intervene too.
One of the best policies of the last government was the £20 additional uplift to universal credit during the pandemic. It cut poverty, it stopped poverty growing in its tracks, and it shows the impact of increasing access to money, not to be facile, on poverty. Does the honourable member share my hope that the government will bring forward their review of universal credit as promised in the Labour's manifesto?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and yes, indeed, I very much look forward to that review coming along soon. Quickly, because a lot of mention has been made of the record of the last government, I recognise the extent of particularly of low wage growth and indeed in-work poverty that we've seen. But the fact is, Madam Chair, that if we look at absolute poverty, which is ultimately the measure that we should be looking at if we're thinking about the extent of destitution and food poverty, we saw 1 million people in absolute poverty, fewer people in absolute poverty after housing costs in 2024 than in 2010, including 100,000 fewer children, 200,000 fewer pensioners, and 700,000 working-age people. So there was real impact made on absolute poverty in the last government, and overall 1 million fewer workless households than in 2010. Much of that was driven by universal credit, and those of us who worked in the social sector in the years before 2010 might remember the absolute labyrinth, the complexity and the perverse incentives that were created by the mess of the benefit system that we inherited in 2010 and we rationalised and improved. There's also, just to mention quickly, the enormous, the £100 billion cost of living package that was put together by the last government in light of the energy shock. Now let's look at what this government is doing. The most significant policy that the government has so far announced with reference to poverty is the withdrawal of the winter fuel payment. 10 million pensioners will be denied this essential benefit, including 70% of disabled pensioners. This is surely not a record that honourable members are proud of. Happy to give way.
I'm grateful to the Shadow Minister for giving way. He's made a point around the government's difficult decision to withdraw the winter fuel payment. If it's something he feels so strongly about, why did his party pledge to do it in 2017?
Danny Kruger.
Well, we didn't pledge to do it, and we didn't do it. And I do think it's important that we should have universal entitlements to these essential benefits. And if there does need to be some means testing, surely it should only penalise, as it were, withdrawal the payment from the wealthiest pensioners, not 90% as is happening under this policy. The other thing the government has done, of course, is to impose a significant tax on employment through the national insurance rise, which they promised not to do in their manifesto. And the cost of this, the impact will fall disproportionately on low-paid workers who will receive the impact of that tax in their wage packet. Now, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, no friend of my party, I believe, Madam Chair, has pointed out that poverty is due to rise because of the budget introduced by the Chancellor. Every household type, except pensioners, will be poorer. All single-parent families will be £1,000 poorer. An average couple with children will be £1,760 poorer. Inequality will be higher. That's all the testament of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. The Office for Budget Responsibility points out that real wages will fall. And indeed, the budget has caused the OBR to lower their real wage growth forecast by 0.5%. As the OBR says, the budget shifts real resources out of private households' income in order to devote more resources to public service provision, which might indeed be the policy that the party opposite wants to pursue, but the effect of it will be, as the OBR acknowledges, to reduce household income.
Would the Shadow Minister acknowledge that the OBR actually said that 90% of households will be better off under this budget, and it's only the 10% of the wealthiest households that will actually feel the cost of this budget, making sure that we are spreading the costs on those shoulders who can most bear it?
Well, as I say, I don't think withdrawing the winter fuel payment from 10 million pensioners reflects a transfer of the burden onto those who can bear it most, nor does imposing a taxation on the low-paid jobs to do that. So what should we do about all this? Now, I'm sorry to say I haven't heard enough in the debate so far about what actually could and should be done, although I do acknowledge that the honourable member who opened the debate made some suggestions, many of which I do agree with, particularly around the importance of an adequate safety net. Look forward to the universal credit review that the government's bringing forward, focus on nutrition and on empowering communities. I agree very strongly with all of those. I don't agree with the need for the essentials guarantee, although I do respect that campaign. I don't think transferring responsibility for setting benefit levels to an independent body, essentially to an unaccountable quango, is the right way to go. This is essentially policy for the government. The government should be responsible and accountable to Parliament for, rather than an independent body. What we need to do, looking quickly at the proposals, the drivers of food bank use by Hunger UK, is we need to improve the benefit system. We absolutely need to make that quicker and easier. I look forward to seeing how the government's going to improve pension credit applications to improve winter fuel payment access. We need to drive up wages. Again, I deprecate the introduction of taxation on wages. And we need to grow our jobs market. We need to ensure that it's easier and better for employers to take workers on and to promote them, which I'm afraid to say that the Employee Rights Bill, which we're anticipating, will not do by giving punitive obligations on employers from day one, will do. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm conscious that time's almost up, so let me finish with this point. I want to praise the flexibility of food banks, the human relationship. The honourable member talks about the powerful sense of community that they imply. There was a moment during the COVID pandemic, a quiet revolution happened that momentarily offered a better social and economic model in which innovations, particularly around food and provision to the poorest among our neighbours, were enabled to flourish. Remarkable innovations happened. I agree we want food banks to be redundant. But while we have hardship, they can be an important part of the mix. I pay tribute to other innovations like social supermarkets as well. And lastly, the Household Support Fund. I don't agree with the honourable member that we need to have more kind of central strategy and direction for that. I think it's great value as the innovation that it enables, and it empowers local communities, something he said he believed in, to ensure that local authorities can take responsibility for supporting their communities. I think that is an important innovation that the government that I supported brought in, and I hope it will continue.
Thank you. Minister Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mrs Vaz. It's a pleasure, as ever, to serve under your chairship, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East for bringing this important debate. And I think it is testament to his judgment and to the importance of this issue that fully 20 members of Parliament have chosen to speak in this debate. And in fact, I think we could have had more. I think we could have gone on for hours because of the importance of this issue. I'd just like to deal, Mrs Vaz, very briefly with a couple of questions that were put to me in the course of the debate. The member for Strangford, who's no longer in his place, asked if I would meet with him, which of course I will. The member for Stoke North also asked if I would meet with the Stoke members of Parliament to discuss this issue, and of course I will. And the Lib Dem spokesperson asked about asylum seekers and where they'll fit in, and I will ask the Home Office Minister responsible to write to her on that subject, because she raises an important point. Now, Ms Vaz, Labour's winning election manifesto said this, and I hope that you will forgive me the length of this quote. We said, good work will be the foundation of our approach to tackling poverty and inequality. We will create more good jobs, reform employment support and make work pay so that many more people benefit from the dignity and purpose of work. Labour is committed to reviewing universal credit so that it makes work pay and tackles poverty. We said, we want to end mass dependence on emergency food parcels, which is a moral scar on our society. Because, Mrs Vaz, and these are my words, no one in the United Kingdom should have to beg for food. Our first budget in 14 years was a down payment on our approach to tackling poverty. We extended the Household Support Fund that members have mentioned for a further year to help people currently struggling with the cost of essentials, including food. And we saw a pay rise for over 3 million lower earners, 6.7% increase to the national living wage, making work pay. And very important to me, we introduced a fair repayment rate on deductions in universal credit, which will help about 700,000 of the poorest families with children to keep more of their universal credit. And as members have mentioned, we'll also see the rollout of breakfast clubs and improving access to childcare will also help parents have more choice in order to get better jobs. And that manifesto commitment and what we saw in our first budget explains our approach to this issue. And I think that these first steps will make a real difference to people's lives. But the scale of the challenge is huge. Members have mentioned what happened to emergency food help over the past 5 years. Well, Mrs Vaz, you and I have been around a while now. And you will remember that in 2010, the Trussell Trust distributed 61,000 emergency food parcels. Last year, 3.1 million. Now, either my maths is wrong or that's a 50-fold increase. And I would simply ask, what happened in those 14 years? I think members have set out the case well, the combination of failed economic and social policies. And in opposition, on the backbenches, and from the front bench, I travelled around the country speaking to people, running food banks and supporting those who needed them to try to understand what on earth was going on with this massive increase in the need for emergency food help. Before the pandemic, my experience was that families were experiencing really significant challenges in their budgets. Post-pandemic, deteriorating health has made it 10 times worse. In government, I've spent time with many of our volunteers who are addressing the family incomes crisis that we are facing. And from listening to them, I know this. Not one of those volunteers wants emergency food help to go on in this way forever. Not one of them wants our fellow citizens to be so vulnerable. And every single food bank volunteer that I've met, a number of whom have volunteered because they needed help themselves at one stage, wants a country where people live never in destitution and always with dignity. So I want to begin by talking about children, because about 800,000 children live in households in the United Kingdom that have used a food bank in the last 12 months. That's just a devastating statistic. That doesn't just harm children today. It has a lasting effect on their life chances, their long-term health, their education and their employment outcomes. They cannot fulfil their potential if they're going to school hungry or worrying about the family at home. And we won't fulfil our potential as a country if the next generation is held back. So ensuring that every child is safe, well-fed and has chances and choices in their life is not just a moral imperative, but an economic one too, and it's a priority for myself and the Secretary of State. That's why we've got the Child Poverty Task Force up and running, led by the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions alongside the Education Secretary. We know the causes of child poverty are wide-ranging, and we are looking at all levers we can pull to increase family incomes, reduce family costs, and give our kids the best start in life. Only yesterday, we met employers, trade unions, and think tanks to discuss options to increase incomes and family resilience in low-income households. We're hearing from a very wide range of people and organisations, including those who are experiencing poverty today, and that approach will inform our strategy. It will be published in the spring. But despite the dreadful inheritance and the £22 billion hole in the public finances, we haven't waited until next spring to help people in desperate need of support. So the cost of living crisis does mean that pressure on household budgets is at an all-time high, and we've seen inflation spikes, including in energy bills and the cost of shopping. So these aren't luxuries that anybody can just easily cut out. Everybody needs a warm home, and everybody needs the basics, which is why, as has been mentioned, we announced a 6-month extension to the Household Support Fund within 2 months of taking office, and we've extended it again for a further year. Now, members have mentioned the need to consider the future of the Household Support Fund and of crisis support, and I look forward to having those conversations with members. We'll be investing £1 billion in that fund, including the Barnet impact, to extend the Household Support Fund and maintain discretionary housing payments fund for a further year. And I know that support is a lifeline for many, and I'm grateful to all of those charities and local authorities who work hard to distribute it. I will, of course.
Point of local charities. Will the Minister join me in congratulating Uncle Patrick Food Parcels, who last week were awarded the King's Award for Voluntary Service in 2024. This accolade recognised their outstanding work in support of communities in West Dunbartonshire, providing food and comfort.
Minister. Thank you, Mrs Vaz, and I thank the member for his intervention, and I send my congratulations to those receiving that wonderful award in West Dunbartonshire. Well done to them. Now, whilst we'll always need to have some form of crisis support, my worry is that we're seeing is not just the consequences of day-to-day crisis, but a chronic challenge. People do need an income that they can live on. And that's why the Chancellor announced in last month's budget, as I said, that we will be introducing a fair repayment rate to help households on universal credit who are having deductions made from their benefit keep more of their money to help them budget for essentials. Over 1.2 million households on universal credit will benefit from this, from reducing the deductions cap from 25% to 15%, which is worth about £420 a year on average. As my dad used to say, Mrs Vaz, out of debt, out of danger. It will make a big difference for some of the poorest people in our country, but we understand that more change will still be needed, and that is why we are committed, as members have mentioned, to reviewing universal credit. But I know, and Beveridge wrote in his report, that social security can only work well when we have policies for full and fulfilling employment. We have to make work pay. It is frankly ridiculous to have a queue at the food bank door when our businesses are crying out for staff. We have millions of people locked out of work, not getting the support they need to build a better life. And that's why, alongside the reforms I've set out, we have set an ambitious long-term goal of an 80% employment rate towards full employment. To achieve it, we've kick-started the biggest reforms to employment support for a generation. We're going to build a new jobs and careers service, giving people proper, tailored support to help them get on in work. Our white paper will bring forward a youth guarantee for our young people to make sure that they are not left on the scrap heap. And we will be empowering our local areas, our towns and our cities, so that they can be in the lead with their work, health and skills plan. And we'll set out all of that detail in our Get Britain Working white paper shortly. And I cannot wait to talk to members and colleagues about it. But I want to make one point about making work pay. It is not enough to get people into any job. It has to be a good job. In 2022, 2.3 million people lived in a household that used the food bank in the last year. And 40% of them were living in families where at least one adult worked. That is not acceptable to me. Too many people in our country are being denied the dignity of decent and fair work. Too many are stuck in insecure jobs with unpredictable working patterns. That's why we've brought forward our Employment Rights Bill. I do not agree that we have to have a choice between high unemployment or poor quality work. We will have the biggest upgrades to rights at work for a generation, including ending exploitative zero-hours contracts, which don't often just see people low paid, but also unsure about the pay that they're going to get next week. And it's that stress and that instability that tips people into destitution. And as I mentioned, we're also putting the living wage up, which will benefit 3 million workers and be worth £1,400 next year for the average full-time worker. In conclusion, Mrs. Vaz, I think, as I've set out, and as members will know from their experience talking to people in their own constituencies, the inheritance of this government could hardly be worse. It's not really the 3.1 million bags of shopping handed out to people in desperate need that is the problem. It's the social and economic failure that represents. We cannot accept it. However, tackling poverty and the ending of mass dependence on emergency food parcels is not just a manifesto commitment that we made to the British public. It's also our priority every day. It's vital to all of this government's missions to break down barriers to opportunity and to deliver economic growth, because you cannot grow a country on shaky foundations. The action we've taken already to support those most in need, to spread opportunity and make work pay, shows that this is a challenge we will take head on, and I look forward to working with all members present to deliver that change.
Thank you, Minister. Seamus Logan, 2 minutes to wind up.
Thank you, Chair. I'm greatly encouraged by the unanimity which has been shown here today, and I want to thank everyone who contributed to the debate here today. In seeking and securing and coming here today for this debate, it was not to criticise the legacy of the last government, nor is it to attack the current government. It's to encourage. But I do regret that some members took the opportunity to make what are essentially parochial party political points. And I'm glad that my point of order last night didn't fall on deaf ears. I hear about the Child Poverty Task Force, about the 30 million invested in breakfast clubs, and that's wonderful. But what we really need is a restoration of the winter fuel payment, an end to the two-child cap, and some learning from the excellent record of the Scottish Government in relation to things like the child payment. I agree with the member for Strangford and other members who spoke about the role of churches and religious groups. As Father Ted often said, this is an ecumenical matter. Lastly, with regard to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, a long-standing friend, I believe, of the Labour Party, perhaps not of the former government, but they have spoken eloquently about the need for an essentials guarantee. If it's good enough for other bodies like the NHS, like the police, like the armed forces, why can't we have an independent body which sets the level of payment to allow for folks' essentials and dignity? The current level of universal credit, I think, is around £91 for a single person. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation are saying that this needs to be £120. That's a 30% increase. I know you're not going to achieve that in year one or the first 5 months of this government, but I believe that that's a laudable aim, and I encourage the Minister to listen more closely to the Essentials Guarantee lobby from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. So I'm going to conclude, Chair, by simply thanking everyone for their participation today, and I hope this is not the end of anything but the beginning of a dialogue between honourable members and the government on this important topic. Thank you.
So let me put the question, and the question is that this House has considered the use of food banks As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.